Hi, folks. Well, today I figured we'd talk about something that is a phenomenon across the world and across time. And I'll do it the day after Halloween. Ghosts. Today on Lessons from the Purple Chair. Hi, folks, and welcome back to Lessons from the Purple Chair. One intellectual's musings from the comfort of a big purple wingback. I'm your host, Professor Timothy R Crowe. Okay, folks, let me tell you a story. So we're going back to January of 1998. It was a very cold night in Kentucky. We're talking about, in fact, it was around 10 below zero that night. I had just left my mother's house. I got off work. At that time, I worked till 11 p.m. And by the time I drove home, it would be around going on midnight. I'd actually stopped at my mother's house first to pick up a few things, and was headed home on this back highway in near Berea, Kentucky. And I'm out on this country highway, and like I said, it was super cold. There was a small powdering of snow on the ground. The moon was full and so bright it actually cast a shadow. And I'm driving along this road. At that time of night, there is absolutely no traffic. There was nobody out. I was the only one stupid enough to be out. And as I went around a corner into this straight stretch on this road, I hit my high beams. And the minute I hit my high beams, wasn't like I saw this just for a brief second or something. I got a very good look. The lights reflected off of someone walking up the road. And, being so cold, it automatically caught my attention. And I kind of slowed down as I got closer. And what I saw was a woman, probably in her late 20s, early 30s, wearing a kind of a powder blue nightgown, kind of similar to the blue in this shirt, that came down to just past her knees. And she had shoulder-length brown or blonde hair, hard to tell in the dark. And she was barefooted. And walking beside of her, kind of like behind her, and she had by the hand, was a toddler, probably around 2 years old, or a little under 2, just big enough to walk, wearing nothing but a diaper and no shoes. And they're just walking up the road. Now, once again, that it was between 5 and 10 below zero that night. I actually slowed the car down and looked right at her. And my first thought was domestic thing, that there's been some sort of argument or fight with the husband or boyfriend, and she's grabbed the baby and run out the door, and she's walking in hysterically or in shock up the road. You see that kind of thing sometimes, but normally in some sort of domestic thing like that, I wouldn't get involved. I just drive on. But because of the weather, I thought I was thinking more of that baby. I'm like, she's going to freeze to death, but even more than that baby's going to freeze to death. So I felt like I had to do something. So I kind of slowed down and looked at her, and then I sped up just a little bit. And there was a driveway, a winding driveway to a house on the hill, just about 30, 40 yards ahead. And I pulled into that driveway, backed out, come back, no car passed me, coming or going. Turned around and went back. And I actually timed this later to see how long it took me to do from the side I saw her to where I turned around and came back. It took, excuse me, it took about 14 seconds for me to go up, turn around, come back. I pulled in, turned around, came back, and she was nowhere to be seen, her or the baby. Well, my first thought was, she seen me turn around, she just got scared, grabbed the kid, and ran and hid. So I actually stopped the car, got out, and oh my God, it was so cold. And I looked around, and I started yelling, "Ma'am, I'm not trying to hurt you or bother you or anything. You're just going to freeze to death, and that baby's going to freeze to death out here. I'll take you to wherever you need to go. I'll take you to the police, take you to your mother's house, wherever you need to go. Just come on out. Don't hide. Ma'am," I'm calling. And I sat there calling for a while because I was really concerned. I thought I may have made it worse. She's got afraid and she's going to hide. They're going to freeze to death out here. But then as I stood out there looking, and I'm still calling, it kind of dawned on me. Where the hell did she go? I mean, you got to understand the scene. This back highway is a built-up flood road. It does flood in that area during the rainy seasons. And on one side of the road was a fence. The road went down. There was a fence and a cow pasture, which I could see clearly because it was a bright moonlit night. No trees. On the other side of the fence, same thing. Down the bottom of the road, there was a fence and a cow pasture. I could see very clearly all the way for at least eighth of a mile. You could just see very clearly all around. Now the nearest house was the one that I had turned around at, which was up on a hill from a driveway that was probably 200 yards long or longer, and another one that was been back behind her. About the equal distance, and it actually wound up a rather steep hill to a house, and I could see the road, the driveway very clearly all the way up to this house. And I'm thinking, there is no way, barefoot, or even if she had shoes on, in the short time it took me to turn around for her to grab that baby and run to that house was just impossible. And there's no place for her to hide. That time of the year, there's because of the cold, all the foliage just turned brown, and there's no bushes down below. There's nothing for her to hide behind. No posts, no bushes, no trees, no nothing. So where the hell did she go? And even then, I was like, if you're wrong, I'm going to go. I hate to think of going home and finding out tomorrow that, hey, this woman was found frozen to death out in the middle of a field. But finally, after looking around and and I even got back in the car and drove up and down the road like a madman for a couple of times, seeing no sign, I finally drove home. And driving home, when I really thought about it, I was like, neither one of these people, this woman nor this child, showed any signs of being cold. No signs of shivering. No signs of any type of physical distress from a bitterly, dangerously cold night. They were walking like it was a hot summer day. Just walking along like nothing. And even the baby never looked at me. Never didn't seem distracted. And yes, I suddenly realized that even though I'd slowed down and looked right at them, neither the woman nor the child ever acknowledged that I was there. You would have thought even the baby would at least look. No, they was like looking straight forward. They never once looked in my direction. So I had to finally come to the conclusion, both on the fact that they were barefoot out there in the cold, showing no signs of distress, paid me absolutely no mind like I wasn't even there, and that they just vanished with no place to go, that I had seen what millions of people have seen throughout time. I had seen a ghost. Now, an interesting follow-up to that story was that I kept it to myself for a long time and didn't, because I didn't think anybody believed me. And finally one day, me and my brother were talking kind of ghost tales. I said, well, I got one for you. I started telling the story, and I got to the point where I said I turned the corner, because he knew exactly what I was talking about. He just stopped me. He said, you seen that woman walking with that kid, didn't you? I said, you really? How'd you know? He said, been a couple of people seen that. I've heard other people talk about it. He said one of his very good friends, Jerry, I won't say Jerry's last name, saw her in the summertime, and he tried to pick her up. So when I saw Jerry, I'm like, Jerry, I told him what I said, and he said, oh yeah. He said Jerry had been out there. It was summer, so it wasn't as odd to see them walking, and he was thinking, hey, a little more romantic thoughts were in his head. He thought he'd pick her up. So, and he actually rode down the window and spoke to her, and he said she never spoke. She just kept walking. He kept, hey, ma'am, come on, you want to ride? Come on, I'll take you where you want to go. All this, she never said a word, just like she did with me, and never acknowledged him, just like she didn't acknowledge him. I was there. But, however, she was closer to the drive that I had turned around at when he saw her. So, as she was walking toward that drive, he figured, same thing. Maybe she's in shock or in a hysteric state of mind. So he pulled in real quick that drive to cut her off. She should have been right there at the car. He said as he whipped in there, which should have cut her off, she should have been like 5 feet from the car, she was gone. She had vanished right in front of his face. And I said, so what'd you do? He said, I'll tell you what I did. I threw that car in reverse, backed out, threw it in gear, and he said, I straightened every curve between there and my house. So that was a shared ghost experience. And these type of stories are not rare. In fact, a poll done in England a few years ago showed that 1 in 10 people believe that they had seen a ghost. Now, ghost tales have been with us for thousands of years. Literally, there are stories of spirits, seen spirits and apparitions show up in almost every single culture throughout every single history of every single civilization on Earth, going all the way back to the Sumerians and the Egyptians, to the Native Americans, about ghosts that would lure them to their deaths. Of course, you have the famous ghost of Hamlet in Shakespeare's play Hamlet. So ghosts are something that have been part of every culture on Earth. And as Tony Cornell, a famous parapsychologist, once said, this is rather than just thinking of this as some sort of just folklore and mythology, you got to consider that this is a universal experience across human civilization and time. It has existed from, as I said, in every culture, regardless of religious background, regardless of social background, you have ghost stories. In the West we call them ghosts. In the Middle East they call them jinn. These fire beings that coexist with us, and they have mischief, and they pretty much do the same thing as ghosts do. They are their forms of ghosts. So so that's a cultural explanation for a phenomenon. And as he said, this is a phenomenon that's been going on throughout all human history, and it would be rather dumb to ignore it and just write it off as some sort of worldwide hysteria. If it's a worldwide hysteria, it's one that's lasted throughout thousands of years in every culture. So we have to kind of look at ghosts and think about, if ghosts exist, what exactly are the damn things? Well, let's kind of go over that. Now, of course, there are a lot of famous ghosts throughout history. I just named a few with Hamlet's ghost. But even in modern times, we have some rather famous ghost stories. For instance, here in the United States, we have the legend of Resurrection Mary near Resurrection Cemetery in Chicago, where people have seen this spirit of a woman walking in and around Resurrection Cemetery, one of the largest cemeteries in the United States. And even people tried to pick her up, or do pick her up, and then she'll vanish. In fact, there is even a case of a gentleman who claimed to have danced at her at a dance hall, and that his name was Jerry Palis. He danced with her at the dance hall and said she was cold to the touch, both her back, the small of her back and her hand, and she asked him to give her a ride home. And as they were driving past the cemetery, she said, "Stop," and he said, "Well, stop here. I need to get out." And he's like, "Well, this is a cemetery." She said, "That I know, but please pull over." So he pulled over. She got out at the gates and walked through the gates and disappeared. Well, the next day, according to Jerry, he went to the address where this apparition had given him for her to take her home, and was met at the door by this woman. And he said, "I'm looking for this girl." And she said, "There's no girl lives here." And he saw a picture inside the doorway of that girl sitting on one of the tables. He's like, "It's that girl right there." And she's like, "That's impossible. That's my daughter. She died in a car wreck, 5 years ago." So, ooh, typical ghost story. But and in fact, there had been a young girl who had died, and her name had been Mary. On her way back from a dance, wearing her favorite dancing dress, and she was killed in an automobile accident. And she had actually been buried in her favorite dancing dress. And it's believed that poor Mary keeps trying to get home, keeps leaving and trying to get somebody to take her home, but she always somehow is drawn back to that graveyard. Which this brings up one of the first explanations for ghosts, is that they are disembodied spirits That person dies and the ghost of the machine comes out. Instead of moving on somewhere, that it remains behind, and from certain circumstances, certain conditions, or the certain type of sensitive person, they can be seen. And and that would be the more classic explanation. However, there are a lot of people that that don't believe in these type of spirits, and if people coming out of their bodies was wandering around, you'd think they'd be seen much more frequently than they are. But the other explanation is the one I find the most interesting, and that what people are actually seeing is not something real, but some sort of atmospheric playback, some sort of captured light and sound, usually light, in a certain place from events that had happened, that kind of get caught in the atmosphere in some way that science has not yet discovered. And when maybe the right person or the right temperature or barometric pressure or the right combinations come along, this is replayed in that atmosphere where it happened. I find this a very interesting theory, and I don't know how in the world it would work. Excuse me, I do have a little cold. But it is a fascinating possibility, and it does match some of the things about ghosts. Often, people who see actual apparitions, they do experience some sort of atmospheric change. Usually in cold spots, in a spot where it should not be cold, a well-heated room or building. Suddenly, you walk through a spot where there is a cold spot, not a draft, just unnaturally cold. Well, that would show some sort of change in the atmosphere. And usually when this happens, they have some sort of ghostly phenomenon happen. Also, this something playing in the atmosphere, rather than, does match with a lot of the description of ghost encounters, because a lot of times when people see a ghost, they know, just like with me, that they don't seem to even know that you're there. They do not even acknowledge you. It's like you're watching a movie being replayed, and you're not part of the scene. And we see a lot of that. A good example is Treasurer's House, is the phenomenon seen in Treasurer's House, which is in York, England, sitting right beside of Yorkshire Cathedral. And it's said that in this house, in the basement, which has an old Roman road down under there, and it's actually been excavated down to the road in one spot, that a legion of Roman soldiers will be seen crossing through there. In fact, a man named Harry Martindale back in 1953 saw that. He was a plumber, installing pipes down there, and he saw, as he said, all of a sudden a Roman soldier walked out through one wall, walked across the floor in front of him, and went through the opposite wall. And no more than had he walked through, then he saw a horse come through with a Roman soldier sitting on it, crossed through and went through the wall, and behind him come an entire legion of soldiers standing side by side, marching, and they walked marching through. And interestingly, he said that from about the knees down, you couldn't see their feet. It was like, they at all, until they reached the spot in the floor that had been excavated down to the old Roman road. And he said for about 2 paces, you could actually see them walking on the road. And then, of course, the debris and all of that, and the dirt from the time that's passed, suddenly would be up to their knees. So they're like walking through the ground. So it's like they are walking on the old Roman road in the dimensions that existed then. And he said, once again, none of them ever looked in his direction or acknowledged that he was there. This sounds like a playback. They're actually walking on, because if they were disembodied spirit, wouldn't they be walking on the contemporary road? No, they're walking on the old road, and they're invisible from the feet down. That sounds like a playback, and you hear this all the time. There was another case of a gentleman that worked in a theater, and one night backstage, he was there alone cleaning, and he saw this man wearing a flat cap, dressed like he was like from the 19th century, and he was walking about 10 feet off the ground. He's just walking 10 feet off the ground, scared the crap out of him, and it was very bizarre. Well, it was found out later on, he didn't know that there had been another building on that site, and that the floor had actually, the ground floor had set about 10 feet higher. So the ghost he was seeing was walking on the old floor of a building that's long gone. Once again, this sounds like some sort of atmospheric playback rather than some sort of actual conscious being or entity that they're dealing with. So, things like that I think have to be considered. And when if it's just one or two cases like that, but you hear case after case after case of that. And now a lot of ghost stories, of course, I think are the cause of people's imaginations, hysteria, fatigue, mental disturbance, drugs, alcohol. There could be a lot of factors of people that would have a ghostly experience and it not being real. Sleep paralysis is a big one. People that will claim to see things staying at the foot of their bed and they can't move. That's most likely sleep paralysis, which happens when you go to sleep. Your body actually kind of turns off the switch so that of you being able to be mobile. That way, if you have a dream, you don't act it out completely in your sleep. That's what keeps you from getting up and sleepwalking. When that gets disrupted, that's what causes sleepwalking. But also, if you're really fatigued and really tired, like when you go to bed, so you've been up many hours, you're real tired, or you're stressed, sometimes you'll float between that spot between sleep and being awake, but your body has already kicked in that paralysis. So you're kind of dreaming awake and paralyzed. So that answers a lot of the succubus and incubus rumors of ghosts sitting on people's chests and all of that. So sometimes there are physiological explanations, mental explanations, but then for a lot of them there just are not. The day that I saw that lady walking up the road, I wasn't distressed and I wasn't overtired. It was late at night, but I'm a night owl, so. And and it was so cold. I wasn't sleeping. I saw this not just fleetingly. I saw this for several minutes. And now another common type of ghost experience is what's known as the hitchhiker, the ghostly hitchhiker. And similar to Resurrection Mary, this is where people claim to have seen a hitchhiker, pick them up, and then drive down the road, and suddenly they vanish. They're not there. There was a wonderful case in England back in the 70s with a man named Roy Fulton. I heard that Roy Fulton has since passed away, but he was a carpet installer from Stanbridge in Bedfordshire. And on a road from Stanbridge to Toppenham one night, he claimed to have seen a young man walking in a white shirt, pair of jeans, walking along the side of the road. He pulled over to offer him a lift. He said he watched him walk back through into the lights of the van, got in the van, sat down, and he asked him where he wanted to go, and he said he didn't say a word. He just pointed up the road. So he put it in gear, started driving, drove maybe a couple hundred feet, and he still hadn't said anything. So he reached down and got his pack of cigarettes and was going to offer him a cigarette, kind of break the ice. And as he turned around to offer him the cigarette, as he said, that boy was not sitting there. And he said in his accent, well, it's get the life out of me. And apparently he turned on the interior lights, saw nothing, throw the van in gear and took off like a bat out of hell to the nearest bar where he got a double scotch quick. And apparently it frightened him so bad, his wife said that night he wanted to go to the police in case somebody had been hurt. And he wanted to sleep with all the lights on because he was scared to death that they'd follow him home that night. Which that brings me to the next topic of how this can affect people's lives. This type of ghost experience can affect people's lives. Of a gentleman that saw a ghost down in a coal mine and literally freaked out and went into shock. They had to take him to the hospital. And after that, he refused to go back down in the mine and took a huge pay cut to stay on the surface, because it disturbed him that bad. This was actually taking money out of his pocket. And I'll tell one more. I had a friend, and if he ever says this, forgive me for telling this. I won't name your name. But he had, and I was involved in this one, He had actually inherited his family's farmhouse. His parents had decided to build a smaller house on the property. They have a huge farm, I think it's like 80 acres, so a huge farm. So they decided to build a smaller cottage type of house as they got older. And they didn't want the old farmhouse. The farmhouse is over 200 years old. It's always been in the family. So they gave it to him, and they actually legally signed it over to him. And this farmhouse had been remodeled completely in the early 90s. So it had all new fixtures, all new stoves and refrigerators and countertops, and redone the heating and the lighting. So this on site is a beautiful, like, brand new house. So he inherited this house. So no house payments, just has to pay the utilities and all of that. Well, he'd been living there a couple of months by himself, and one day he decided to, when he'd come home from work for lunch, he had an hour's lunch break, didn't work far from home, and he came in with his sandwich, set stuff down, and as he walked into the kitchen, he told me that there was this hook up in the ceiling, which I think had been used for like a potted plant hook or something like that. Been painted over several times, coated with old paint and all this. But as he walked in, he said that standing in a chair was an old woman, and this old woman was very thin, and she had on a typical old granny dress, like 1940s granny dress, which doesn't mean anything. Old women still wear those in that area. Her hair up in a bun. Said she looked like she was at least in her late 70s, very wrinkled, very old, and she had her head in a noose, and that noose was tied to that hook. And he said she had the most terrifying, stressed look on her face, eyes bugged out. And he looked at her, and his first thought, like he maybe was, is, well, she's maybe has Alzheimer's, senility, and somehow she's got in the house. And he's like, "Can I help you, ma'am?" And she looked at him, and all of a sudden went to step off of that chair. And he said, "Oh my God, don't do that." And he reached to grab her. And when he did, she vanished. Well, he turned around, grabbed his keys off the coffee table, went out the door, and that was in 1998. And he has to yet walk back through the door of that house. In fact, he called me, told me what had happened, because he said he knew that I would be somebody to believe him. And he asked me, he said, "Will you go out to the house and get some of my things?" So me and a friend went out there, and I swear, I was like walking into a crime scene. Oh, the door was still open. Good thing it's out in the country. Door was still open. We went inside. His Subway sandwich and Coke were still sitting on the coffee table. Lights were still on when we'd walked in. And, of course, we saw no old woman or anything, and we got the list of things he wanted us to get, which is mostly his clothes, his TV, his VCR. This was the 90s. Things like that, and we loaded them all up. Now, to this day, he rents an apartment, and since then, he's married and had a child, or two. And he has still yet to step back through a house. He's paying rent. He's paying utilities on this place, this new home of his, when he has a house that is free and clear his. All he has to do is pay, of course, the utilities and the property tax. And he is paying the property tax on a house that he has not stepped in since 1998. His parents are still alive, and one of his siblings, his daughter, and they did kind of take care of the house, keep it in good shape. And I've asked him, "Are you ever going to move back in that house?" He said, "I keep swearing that yes, I will." He said, "But Tim, every time I go to that house, I put my hand on that doorknob." In his words, he said, "I shake like a dog trying to shit a peach seed, and I just can't go in." So the thing is, a lot of people may fake and tell big stories and lie about ghost encounters. But like with my friend, it's costing him a fortune in money, and really, really disrupted his life. So this is a very real experience that people go through. And exactly what it is, I have no idea. Could it be entities of the dead? Could it be some sort of sensitive to another dimension, another world that most people don't see? Could it be some sort of weird some psychic or even natural phenomenon, supernatural phenomenon that happens in the right types of weather and barometric pressure conditions? I don't know. But one thing I am sure of, are there ghosts? Yes, they are. Yes, there are. Whether they're the really seen kind or even the ones from our imagination. But ghosts do exist, and they do affect our lives, affect our culture, have even affected our literature and history. But what they are, who knows? But as Arthur C. Clarke said, do we really want to know the mundane truth? Who doesn't enjoy a good ghost story? I hope I've told you a couple of good ones here. So, you know what? If you've had a ghost experience, I love hearing good ghost stories. Please write it out down below. Do it anonymous if you want to. Claim it was a friend. I don't care. I'd love to hear it. And while you're at it, go ahead and give me a like and hit this little purple chair and continue to enjoy lessons from the purple chair. And until next time, you find yourself a good chair, get yourself a good book, and pursue your passions. Later.